It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, to this first official episode of the 2024 season. I want to thank you for bearing with me as I overcame the plague over the last couple of weeks. But I am back with a wonderful guest who comes to us all the way from the other side of the world in New Zealand, or the Antipodes, as he calls it. I always get a chuckle out of that because it reminds me of the line from A Midsummer Night's Dream when Hermia is talking about a hole being bored through the center of the earth. But here he is, all the way from New Zealand, the Antipodes, our guest for this episode, Mr. Dean Bradley.
Thank you very much. I feel like I know you well from listening to every episode that you've done. So, yes, and very pleased to be on board.
Well, I love to hear that from listeners, especially longtime listeners, because it means that I'm doing my job well, that they feel like they're just listening into a conversation among peers, among people who are super sleuths like them and interested in this subject. And so glad to have you, friend, as a friend and a listener, and now as a guest on the program.
Thank you very much. I must stress I'm very much an amateur in the strict meaning of the word, a lover of the topic. I have no PhD or anything like that, but I can read a book. So I have covered the subject for, I'd say it's the last about 25, 30 years. Yeah.
In my mind, Dean, as you well know from listening to the program, and as most of our listeners know, to my mind, that gives you all the PhD that you need. Because what really is the regimen of a PhD, if it isn't just reading volume after volume after volume, absorbing what you read, comprehension of what you read, and no, you haven't written a dissertation, but if that's the only capstone that you have not completed, then I'd say, welcome to the program, Dr. Dean Bradley.
Good one. That's actually one of the. I was hoping, because your catchphrase is, keep asking questions, that we could knock a few questions around. And that was actually one of the ones I wanted to ask was, what initially captures people's interest the most about the Oxfordian theory? What's the appeal? And I'm trying to think back to when I first discovered it, but there's some sort of magic, some sort of hook, some sort of thing that keeps you digging deeper, and I'd like to know what it was for you.
I feel a big part of my connection to the authorship mystery is my connection to the works as an artist, and having directed 24 of the 37 recognized plays, as well as a stage adaptation of Venus and Adonis, and having produced and directed more than now 70 Shakespearean productions, because I've covered many of the titles multiple times. I mean, I've done 10 Midsummer Night's Dreams, for instance. I'm about to embark upon my 4th Macbeth and my 7th Taming of the Shrew this coming season. And so for me, it's my artist's heart and passion for the magnificence of the storytelling, and my inherent belief that the storyteller could not have been this country bumpkin from Stratford, but had to have been somebody who lived a much fuller, richer life and experienced many of the realms and worlds and people that we find in the stories of the plays.
Absolutely. Agreed.
But one of the things I'd like to talk about, because one of the reasons that this episode came about was you did something that I actually discourage listeners from doing. You decided to jump into the fray with a group of folks. Well, one particular individual is what we're going to learn from you in a moment. But you decided to actually brandish your steel against those out there in the world known as the Oxfrauds, who have been spending a great deal of their time and energy trying to debunk the Oxfordian theory and trying to paint all of us super sleuths about the Shakespeare Authorship Mystery as tin hat, foil wrapped, wearing conspiracy crazy kooks. And I'm curious, Dean, first off, why did you decide to don the armor and jump into the battle in that way?
As it happened, I watched a Elizabeth Winkler YouTube. She's been interviewed quite a lot lately. I really enjoyed her book, and I think she's done great things for the movement. I watched the video, and stupidly, my eye glanced down to some of the comments down below, and of course, you find a couple of real naysayers there. Do you want me to give you an example of how the thread worked, or do you want me to summarize it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Just give me an idea of what it was that you saw that you could not resist either. And I'm assuming that what happened was you couldn't resist responding.
Yes, I took the bait. Someone called Kerry 9901 said, "Well, Shakespeare didn't write anything. Whether it was Bacon, Oxford, or Neville, I'm not sure. Although Oxford seems most likely. Who knows? But Shakespeare of Stratford seems to me impossible." At this point, it was answered by someone who said, "It didn't seem impossible to all the people who were actually there and said it was him." Okay, so what do I call this person who's my opponent? Do I call him my adversary, or the Dark Lord, or the correspondent, maybe?
The poorly educated, ignorant, and misinformed? How about that?
Well, he's actually pretty good. He knows his stuff, and he gets into minutiae. Anyway, I thought this is the best approach to take, is to be polite at all times, to pretend you don't know much, so you're feeding them the answers, and you're keeping the question open. As soon as you give them a definitive answer, they'll close down on that. So keep the question open, and appear a little ignorant. I said, I'm new to this subject. I've only just read this book. I don't really know much. So could you please, explain things to me? So I said, who were these contemporaneous people who were there who stated that Stratford Will was the great author? Simple question. Confident tone in reply. So kind of you to ask. Would you like them all at once or one at a time? I replied, just anyone pre-1616 who said this guy here, Stratford Will, wrote something, and there is documentary evidence he did. Thank you. Keeping it polite. Note the defensive tone. Why pre-1616? Did everyone after then have their memories altered? So after reading Diana Price, like a lot of us have, we know that there is very little contemporaneous evidence that Shakespeare was a writer. If you remember the appendix of that book, and where it's called Literary Paper Trails, there is a giant gap there. And so I was deliberately trying to debate this person and say, well, what have you got? He said, why pre-1616? I said, I guess it's just easier to get to know someone, interact with them, and have conversations while they're still alive, rather than posthumous.
Of course. I mean, hey, unless you talk to dead people. I mean, if you talk to dead people, I guess you're good.
You'll a seance or something, yeah. Shakespeare must have been a very busy man about town, known to hundreds of theatre people, and either a colleague, hero, or rival to all the writers of his era. it'd be nice to have some glimpse into that daily interaction and to have firm, unequivocal identification of Stratford Well as a writer. Good question. So, and a defensive tone again. So you want to know someone who you and Molly are still alive, they haven't got much in the drawer there. Alive would be preferable. It would put Will right at the centre of things when they were happening. If you can provide me with such evidence, it would be pretty hard to refute, and I'd have to agree with you. So that's how it began.
And you have shared with me that things deteriorated pretty quickly. In fact, you described your interaction with this individual as curt, if not rude, stubborn, and ever-present online troll of cyclopean one-eyedness, which I think is a Shakespearean description if I've ever heard one in my whole life. Cyclopean one-eyedness.
Is that a word? I don't know. Is that a word? Yeah. You know who I mean.
Hey, you know what? Our man invented 7,000 words and phrases. And one of the things that I always share with actors is when you come across a word that you are unfamiliar with and you look it up and all of the search engines you try tell you that the first actual use of that word comes from the play we are rehearsing and from the mouth of the character you have been cast to play, then what that tells you is that whatever's happening in that character's mind at that moment is of such import that they had to create a brand new word in order to express their feeling on the subject. And that's huge for an actor. And if you as an actor don't realize then at that moment your character is feeling its greatest passion of the moment in order to then need to create new language to express those feelings, then you're missing the moment in the play.
Yes, I agree entirely.
So I'll go with cyclopean. I think everyone understands exactly what you mean. And especially when it follows ever-present online troll.
Anyway, I'd asked him, give us some evidence. And, okay, here were his best shots. This was the top of the drawer stuff. He got back to me and he said, in 1611, John Davies of Hereford, London poet, published a book of epigrams, one of which reads to our English Terence, Mr. William Shakespeare. Goes on to say, some say goodwill, which I in sport do sing, hadst thou not played some kingly parts in sport, thou had been a companion to a king. Goes on from there, but he also said, the same guy Davies, identifies the poet William Shakespeare as a gentleman and a player in 1603 Microcosmos. It's a small marginal note which just says WS right beside it. And the interesting fact is that poem goes on to further elaborate what this author thinks of William Shakespeare, and it appears to be someone completely different to good old Stratford Well. So anyway, those were the two options he gave me. And well, the first one isn't really saying he's a writer. He's saying he's comparing him to Terence, who is a playwright. And he said, that's good enough. That's, look, there it is on the title page. We need not look any further. We need not dig any further. Let's move away. And I said, just a minute. Let's look into who Terence was. If he's calling him the English Terence, maybe that could shed, some light on things. And I looked it up. Terence was an African slave in Roman times. He wrote Roman comedies, but he began as a slave in a backwater town in Africa. He was brought to Rome and educated by aristocratic people who had a literary circle. He was the author of like 6 comedies, which were big hits. So he kind of went from a slave with no literary ability to someone who was writing the top comedies of the day within a very short time, because he actually died at the age of 25. And I thought, okay, why are they referring to Shakespeare as Terence? So I looked at the prologue of The Brothers, which is the last play that Terence wrote. And in this passage, Terence has his actor mouthpiece recite this in the prologue. Okay, so he says, "One other thing, certain people, not our author's biggest fans, have been claiming he's had the help of some pretty well-known individuals in the writing of these plays. Help, as in holding the pen and writing the lines. This has been put forward as a serious accusation, but our author begs to differ. He considers it a compliment of the highest order to be linked by friendship, even in such a way, with men of distinction and esteem. Who amongst us hasn't had their help with something or other, be it business or pleasure?" So that is contemporaneous evidence right in the play of Terence himself that he was a front man to someone else's writing, with his hand, so to speak. So as a denial, it's very unconvincing. And I put it back on my correspondent that doesn't really amount to much of a proof that Shakespeare was a writer. It was just a small marginalia, WS in the inside there, but if you read on, it paints a different picture.
If anything, it's a mark against their argument, isn't it? If you know your actual history and you know the Greeks and the Romans, which obviously the great writers and poets of the Elizabethan and Jacobean age were well read and educated in, then you know that is actually benefiting the argument that Will of Stratford is not the writer, and that he is some sort of a front man, that he is the slave who is being given credit for the works of others. But here's one of the biggest problems I think we run into, which is that a lot of these quote unquote Shakespearean scholars are not classical scholars. They don't know the classics. They don't know anything beyond the realm that they live in, which is to try to prove Stratford is Shakespeare. And the only way that they could truly do that is if they went and did the background study, went and read the Greek masters, went and studied the Roman playwrights, and truly knew what the contemporaries of the time knew, which requires a Cambridge or Oxford education of the 16th century.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have that. All I know is the poem goes on to say, my correspondent left the quotation there at the marginalia, but it continues and it gets interesting at that point. It says, "And fell fortune cannot be excused, that hath for better uses you refused. Wit, courage, good shape, good parts, and all good, as long as these goods are no worse used. And though the stage doth stain pure, gentle blood, yet generous ye are in mind and mood." What do you make of that? The stage doth stain pure, gentle blood. It doesn't sound like he's talking about Stratford Well, does it?
I make of that the same thing I make of "thou wouldst had been a
companion
to a king." I think exactly. You are listening to someone who is writing with some deep internal knowledge and knows that the true writer should have been alongside a true king. And perhaps the king the writer is talking about could have been and should have been King Henry IX.
I didn't. Wow. Okay.
That's where my mind goes immediately when I hear, okay, this man who we know, who is writing all these great works, who is doing so under this false name, under different circumstances, could have been a companion to a king. Well, that tells me that he's already a companion to a potential king. He's a companion, perhaps even the greatest companion this young prince ever had.
Yeah.
His father, for instance.
Yeah. Wow, that's a good angle.
But of course, then, that's how and so, perhaps I'm so biased by my belief system now in the succession aspect of this entire mystery that's where my brain goes first. But certainly, and we are all guilty of wanting to prove our own theories correct. And I admit that wholeheartedly.
Confirmation.
Which is, I have a bias. I admit it. We're looking for our own confirmation.
Yeah.
But I think that certain evidence lends itself to certain confirmations far better than it does others. For instance.
Yeah, like this little verse, like fell fortune cannot be excused, that hath for better uses you refused. Now that suggests to me, like who had cruel fortune deny them, Oxford or Shakespeare or Shakespeare? Definitely downward and declass day trend in Oxford's life. Fell fortune. He could have been a lot of things. He championed his literature, and it cost him dearly in all facets of his life. And the other line, the stage doth stain pure gentle blood, yet generous you are. And who's the more generous, Oxford or Shakespeare? One is known to be like a penny pinching, tax dodging, grain hoarding, debt collecting, money lender, and Oxford, a patron of the arts, and so generous in sponsoring music and literature that he actually made himself broke, and needed to be bailed out by the Queen. So I think there are a few clues there that who we're talking about.
And did you share this with your Oxfraudian opponent?
Oh yeah.
And what kind of response did you receive from this ever-present online troll?
Well, first of all, I said this suggests a declasse nobleman who has fallen from the highest echelons of privilege by scandal and being tainted by the stage. But I may be surprised and convinced by your eloquent rebuttal of this enigmatic epigram. I'd appreciate you addressing the points I've asked your views about. And he got back with, I have answered your question many times over. I have repeatedly given you exactly what you asked for. You are being intentionally obtuse in order to avoid the obvious. There is a reason anti-Stratfordianism is a tiny little fringe group that is not taken seriously by anyone. You can be presented with unambiguous evidence right before your eyes and say with a straight face that you don't see it. What can you do but laugh?
So, in other words, the tactic is accuse your adversary of your own actions to deflect.
Exactly. And I was going to ask you what, in your opinion or in your experience, have been the kind of tactics that the Stratfordians use. I mean, to me, that is denial, basically. That's just, I don't want to listen to what you said. I don't want to hear that about Terence. I recognise he's a playwright. That'll do. I've seen it. Now I'm like a detective moving out of the scene without doing any forensic evidence and saying that's a case closed. Denial is one. I find they, ignore, which is another version of that. Another one is the straw man argument, which they attack your weakest argument and think they've knocked the whole thing down. But that's a good reason why, if you're online, put only your strongest arguments, because if you can imagine what the response will be from a Stratfordian, possibly you shouldn't be leading with that or even including it. Put your best stuff forward and just see how they wriggle and run. And, this conversation got bogged down on definitions of one word. And we went through the Oxford Dictionary. He was trying to shut it down to fit his definition. I was always saying, but, a word like bombast, for instance, you say it means only writing. I'm saying it can mean acting. It can mean extemporized verse. It can mean, so they really narrow it in. So while we're trying to keep it quite wide and quite open-ended, what they're very good at doing is shutting it down to a very small point, which they know how to argue because they've probably got all the answers written and stored on their computer anyway, and just just flip them to you as needed. So that's my experience. I think you need to come in under the radar. If you come in with an answer, they'll shut you down. Keep saying things like, "I'd appreciate your feedback. I really am interested. There's got to be a bottom line here. Is there a smoking gun? If you can help me find it, please do. Keep it collegial if possible." Yeah.
One of the things that I have found, so I have a couple of responses to that. The first one being is, I have always found it interesting that Stratfordians want to consistently have things both ways. When it suits their argument, if it weren't for double standards, they'd have no standards at all. Because when it suits their argument, then they argue that direction. For instance, this word has one meaning and only one meaning, and this is what it means right here when this person writes it about Shakespeare or when Shakespeare himself writes it. But on the other hand, they want Shakespeare to be this multi-layered genius who understands that words have multi-layers of meanings and can be used in 1,000 different ways. And so it seems to me like you're not allowed to paint him as a genius and a bumpkin at the same time. I love how one of their greatest arguments is that if you look at the details in this Italian play and in this Italian play and in this Italian play, see how he gets it so wrong. It's because he was never in Italy and he didn't really visit there and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Except that he tends to know everything he's talking about in every other area that suits them. So, it just, I can't come to terms with that. He's an idiot savant. He's the Rain Man of the Elizabethan age. I mean, because that's what they really want us to believe, I think, is that he's just some kind of Rain Man, right? He's Wapner in 20 minutes. Wapner in 20 minutes. 382 toothpicks. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And it blows my mind. And so that's one of the things that I have witnessed. But I also have to confess that I have been spared. Only in the very early first season episodes of this series did we ever receive any types of attacks from the Stratfordian camp or the Oxfrauds. It was very early on and it was short-lived and they went away. And we have had critics who have given us reviews who have, made comments about, oh, this is hogwash or this is craziness or, no, those are a bunch of conspiracy theories. And they pop up from time to time. But the truth of the matter is we're very blessed, spared the attacks on our website. They leave us alone. They leave me alone. The Oxfrauds have left me alone.
That's good.
It's also one of the reasons why I don't go dive into their fray, because what's the point of that? Arguing, there's nothing more idiotic than arguing with an idiot. It is a complete waste of time and energy to engage in that type of conflict unless it's for what you're sharing with us is a comparative study and a strategic analysis.
What it can do is sharpen your own knife of your own argument, and it can force you to other positions you had not thought of because you thought, okay, I'm arguing the Oxfordian side of things, and I know how to do that, and I know the points, and they know the points too. So it's like trench warfare, where each missile, we know where it's going to land, and we're prepared for that, we're defended for that. But by stepping out of that a little bit, you kind of break that dichotomy, and that's what kind of happened in this case. But going back to your earlier point about trying to have it both ways, my correspondent had to argue, and this is where he was forced to go, that the poem, the stage staineth, pure gentle blood, refers to Stratford Will because he had a coat of arms and was a gentleman. Really? You think his Warwickshire family is pure gentle blood? And I said, okay, so he's actually degrading his name and his family escutcheon by playing with common players. And he said, yeah, pretty much. And I said, well, aren't you, as you said, aren't you having that both ways? He's an upwardly mobile, entrepreneurial go-getter. He's moving up the classes, but he's also declassé now that he's a gent, and he can't be stained by the stage. And I said to him, how can you, if you just tell me one thing, how did Stratford Will become stained by the stage?
Well, apparently he made, what would amount to in today's day and age, a ton of money being a playwright and stage actor. And that's how he was able to afford his coat of arms and become a member of the gentry and all. Like, apparently he was this, great mastermind and businessman who also hoarded grain, evaded taxation, and sued people for pence and shillings.
Oh, yeah. But isn't it interesting that you got him above his station and arguing that side of it, and also that he's a common man. He's gentle will. He's an everyman. It's, as you say, it's a moving target when you're trying to describe who this guy is. And I believe it's because, and you believe too, it's because we're talking about two different people at the same time.
So one of the things that Stratfordians tend to point to most often, like when they really start to lose ground and they're trying to provide what they call contemporary evidence that Shakespeare was Shakespeare, is they lean on Green's Groatsworth of wit.
Oh, yeah, I was going to come to that. So he said, okay, then here's proof that the Stratford Will was a writer. And do you want to lay the foundation for this famous piece of text, because it's probably one of the central pillars of Stratfordianism, and it's in every biography, it's in every, it's really a linchpin. Do you want to describe the setup of how this, pamphlet?
Yeah, explain it. One of the things you learn in journalism, and I spent almost 15 years as a community journalist originally for weekly newspapers and then later for daily newspapers. I still carry my press badge. I have a card that was issued to me by the California Highway Patrol, because I lived in California at the time when I was doing my journalism. The California Highway Patrol at that time used to issue press credentials, and you were able to use that when you came upon an accident or a crime scene or a deadly fire. You could show your California Highway Patrol press credential to have access to the site. they'd be holding the public back at the barriers. But if you had your press credential, you could use that to access the site to then go find who the PIO, the public information officer on site was, to ask questions and get your story. And I still carry that in my wallet, actually, just for nostalgic purposes. But
Good.
the, as a journalist, you approach things with a different mindset, I think, with a different sort of investigative mindset. And you're told, though, by all the great editors and publishers I worked for, always said to me, when you write the story, you have to write the story as though the reader knows nothing. And so I know a lot of our audience members are very familiar with Green's Groatsworth, but maybe some aren't. So go ahead, lay that foundation so everybody understands where we're going with this topic.
We don't have to read it all out. As you say, most people are probably aware of it, but basically Green is on his deathbed, repenting his relationship with actors and the theatre. He's in poverty and he's on his way out. And he's warning three of his co-writers, Marlowe, Thomas Nash, and George Peel, don't do what I did. I mucked it up. I got involved with the wrong sort of people. He says, base-minded men, all three of you, if by my misery you are not warned. And he goes on to take a pop at puppets and antics garnished in our colours, and they're all words for actors. And he's saying that these actors are taking our words, making us look good, and then ripping us off, basically. But one in particular, he says, yes, trust them not, for there is an upstart crow beautified with our feathers, who supposes he is as well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you. And being an absolute Johannes factotum is, in his own conceit, the only shake scene in the country. So there's a lot to unpack there, but first of all, an upstart crow is a newcomer, a Johnny-come-lately. Green wrote this in 1592 when Stratford Will was new on the scene. He might have been there for 2 or 3 years, perhaps. In Aesop's fable, the crow borrowed the feathers of other birds in order to appear more attractive. So in this case, it means the crow is stealing other people's writing to cover himself in glory. And when we look at the early bad quartos, we find that to be true, that whole chunks of them are ripped off from Marlowe and Spencer, other writers. So they're saying this new guy on the scene is a plagiarist. Johannes factotum means a jack of all trades. He's got his hands in many, he's got his iron in many fires. So here's a newcomer who is stealing more established writers' feathers, considers himself the equal of Marlowe and Nash because he's able to bombast out a blank verse as best as any of them. But really, he's a jack of all trades. He's an opportunist businessman involved in money lending, an involvement in the theatre, and play brokering. And there's a clear accusation of that in here, that he is taking other people's work and churning it out some pretty bad quality stuff. And at first anonymously, gradually under the name WS, and eventually full out William Shakespeare. And these are bad quartos that do not get acceptance into the canon.
We have a lot. It's true. We do. We have a lot of what are now referred to as bad quartos. That's the common phrase. It's used by everyone, including the Stratfordians. You have these bad quartos. There are, there's Q1 and Q2 of certain plays with quarto 1, quarto 2. In some plays like Hamlet, you have F1, F2, folio 1, folio 2. Most versions of Hamlet that you purchase today will refer to Q1, Q2, F1, F2 in many of the annotations that you find. And then there'll be notes somewhere in the text that either in the front or in the back that explain why the editors chose to use this word or this phrasing or that phrasing by combining them all together in some ways. I don't agree that that's the best thing to do.
Yeah.
But it happens. And you know, I've had actors sometimes will be working with a script and the actors will turn to me and they'll say, what does this mean? There's these parentheses right here. This is Q1. And then there's parentheses over here. This is Q2. And I said, well, that's because they're using the text from Q1 here and they're using the text from Q2 here because some editor decided that that's exactly what he truly meant. And what I always tell actors is go to the first folio of 1623 and use that language, that word, that text, and forget the Q's and forget F2 and go with the first folio. That's what we're going to work with. That's just me. That's where I come from.
Sure. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
But one of the things that I think what I'm hearing you say, and this is a different approach, I think, than anything we've ever had on the program before. Or if so, it's been very lightly touched upon. What I'm hearing you say is that Green is describing William of Stratford to a T. And therefore, William of Stratford is actually stealing the works of other writers, including then, and the pen name established by Edward de Vere. Is that the theory you are presenting?
Yeah, and there's other. I thought to myself when I was battling with the correspondent, we ended up just battling over bombast out meaning right, and I just said, all right, I'm walking away from that argument, and I said, why am I wasting a perfect summer holiday arguing with this guy? We'd reached an impasse, and there was just nowhere to go. We could only ridicule each other and tear each other's arguments down. Then when I was just walking around the place, I had a eureka moment, and it was, let's try to look at it from his side of the argument. I mean, these two camps, Stratfordianism and everyone else, are so far apart, it's almost impossible for a conversation to be had because we're so entrenched, and the middle ground is somewhere that not many people go. So I said, here's someone like me. He's, very passionate, involved in the subject. He's spending a lot of his time trying to convince me, of his argument. He's probably feeling frustrated that I'm not listening, being heard. And I guess he's just as sincere in his belief that what he's saying is true, that Shakespeare was a writer. And I thought, well, I don't think he was, but let's just go there. Let's just say that Upstart Crow was a writer. Maybe even had a grammar education. Okay, let's hop on the hypothetical train and see where it goes. I might learn something. I might find out something different. If I keep arguing that he was illiterate and couldn't write, then other alternatives close down to me. So by serendipity, that led me to a book. I don't know if you know it. It's Sabrina Feldman's The Apocryphal Shakespeare.
Yes, I'm aware of it. Absolutely.
Do you know that?
I do, and I know of the apocryphal theories, right? These are the plays, these are the early plays he wrote, or these are the plays he wrote during the time that we don't know where he was during his life. I mean, if you want, you can also take that. There are many books out there and documentaries out there about the apocryphal texts of the Bible and the Apocrypha of Jesus, because he appears in the temple at 12 and then he doesn't show up again until he's 30, and we go, well, where was he for 18 years? So and it's funny because Stratfordians love to equate their guy to a Christ-like figure, right? Like he is this like God-like figure, isn't he, in their minds? So yeah, I'm familiar with the apocryphal theory and that kind of way to explain all of these bad quartos.
Yeah, I would say like the Vatican, actually. Like we are trying to storm the Vatican and trying to convince archbishops that maybe Easter Monday was a bit of a hoax or something. So of course we're going to encounter opposition. The argument she makes is there are about 10 to 12 apocryphal plays, all mostly written in the 1590s, and there were plenty of bad quartos too, like Henry V, Taming of a Shrew, Romeo and Juliet, Merry Wives of Windsor, right up to Hamlet. So it was something that was continuously going on through the career. And the question really is who is writing this, or who is taking credit and publishing these very degraded plays in the case of the bad quartos, or other plays that are under the name William Shakespeare, but clearly not, and have been dismissed. But there are at least 10 plays, and if you do take them into account, that just makes the timing of the amount of time he had to write the plays just impossible. But other than that, you have to find someone else who has been willing to take the good copies of the folio type plays and degrade them down into a public performance that is nice and easy on the ear, earns a bit of cash, is popular, people keep coming back to it, but he's not concerned with the writing. He's not concerned about this work for posterity. He is concerned about making some money. And I'm just wondering who else could it be except the theatre owner, part-time actor, plagiarist, upstart crow. We know it is Stratford Will.
It's a very interesting thought, because I have to admit, again, I'm always willing to admit my bias. I have held the belief for a very long time that Stratford Will never knew that he was going to go down in history as William Shakespeare, the great writer. I have also even wondered, a lot of people see him as this front man, or that, Johnson chose him, or that even Edward de Vere himself helped choose him. And I have always held the position that I don't believe that Edward de Vere and Will of Stratford ever knew each other, maybe even never knew of each other. But what you're opening up is a door that could suggest that Stratford Will knew that the name William Shakespeare was a pseudonym, that it was close enough to his own name that he could steal some of these works, plagiarize them, create, actors' quarto versions and publish them, or even pass them off as his own, because he knew that the true writer could never call him out, could never sue him, could never accuse him, could do nothing about it.
Yes. I've always found this to be the big question of how the actual how the exchange of the identities happened. Who was involved, who knew, who decided. In the last 3 weeks, through to talking and reading new angles, I'm coming around to the theory that it was more of an opportunistic thing from Stratford Will, who found himself in an opportunity where he just, landed in a perfect situation for him to take control of. Again, these bad quartos, they worry me, and I think Oxfordians and other anti-Stratfordians should dig into it a bit deeper, because it's a big elephant in the room and it's largely ignored, and the implications of it really blow out the timeline of how the plays were written. It's unbelievable how much coarse and very basic the dialogue is. They're full of rustic humour. They've got heaps of clown scenes, and there's very little philosophical or literary polish at all to them. Can I give you an example?
Please.
we all know Hamlet's famous soliloquy.
Is this the quarto one, Hamlet?
Yeah. That marvelous speech, so articulate.
Oh, I love it. Oh, yeah, I love this. Is a great example. This is exactly the example that just came into my mind. So we are definitely on the same page here, my friend. Yeah, let's hear Q1, Hamlet's famous to be or not to be.
Okay, you want the bad quarto 1603 version?
Yes, please.
What if you, what if you speak the speech as you remember it? You've played Hamlet, haven't you?
I have, twice.
Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows. You could continue that on for me for a bit.
Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them.
To die, to sleep no more. Okay. That sounds pretty philosophical, and like as you go on into that soliloquy, the language gets richer and richer. It piles up with legal references and to quotations from Italian books and Cardanus's Comfort. This is the bad quarto version. To be or not to be? Aye, there's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? Aye, or no. To sleep, to dream, aye, marry, there it goes. For in that sleep of death, when we awake, and born before an everlasting judge, from whence no passenger ever returned, makes the happy smile, and the accursed damned. Now, how do you explain that?
That's terrible. That's so horrible.
So who copied who? One of them had to come first. Did Oxford look at that and go, there's potential in there, I could really work that up into something good? Or is it the other way, that there is the extant version and someone, for popularity's sake, has dumbed it down and made it comprehensible to, all the groundlings chewing their nuts in the pit?
And if
That's what I think's happened. I think
if there's some other plagiarist who is stealing Stratford Will's work and putting it out there, then Stratford Will, a man who was involved in countless petty little lawsuits, certainly would have put a stop to it, and certainly would have come after that plagiarist. But if Stratford Will is the plagiarist, he knows that the nobleman behind the pseudonym William Shakespeare is never going, his hands are tied. He's never going to be able to do anything to stop these apocrypha from getting out there.
That's right. And who stands most to gain if Stratford Will is obtaining these plays, selling them to his own theatrical company for a price, getting paid for the audience and the people coming through, and then maybe getting another little cut when he flips them onto the printer. That makes sense. He's seizing his opportunity. If someone else is doing it, as you say, I think he would be around to the printers with a few mates and some baseball bats and say, one way or another, we're going to stop this because this isn't my work. This is not how, if I was an up-and-coming writer and had written Venus and Adonis and someone was putting out these plays in my name, I would certainly just do or say something about it. But if you are a incognito aristocrat, you just have to sit on your hands and look on in horror and go, oh my God, my writing has been turned into a travesty, and I'm just going to have to live with it.
Well, and there were some who would argue that Robert Greene is another pseudonym for Edward de Vere.
Yeah.
And so here you could have de Vere complaining outwardly and openly about the stain upon him from having been involved with the theater too much during his nobleman's life, and him lamenting that there is this guy out there who is stealing all of our stuff, including my best work, and fawning it off as himself.
Yes, that's what I'm coming around to bit by bit. Another example from the bad quartos, the wooing scene between Harry and Catherine of France and Henry V. You've played this scene many times?
I have not. And, that's one of my gotaways. I'm too old now to play Henry V. And so it's one of those roles that I will never get to play. It's one of those bucket list roles that escaped me. It got away. So I don't get to do my St. Crispin's Day speech, unfortunately. But you can't play them all. You just, there's too many roles to play. One of the beauties of the Shakespeare canon is one man, one woman in their lifetime can play a myriad of roles, from ages 5 through 80. But sometimes you miss out on a few along the way.
Yeah, you need to be an athletic young buck to play that role, don't you?
Yes, it's true.
But you've directed it?
No, actually, I have not. It is one of the ones that has not. I have not directed it or produced it, and I definitely didn't get to play Henry V. I've produced Henry IV parts 1 and 2, and I played Henry IV in parts 1 and 2.
Okay,
but
fun.
And Richard III, of course, I have produced and directed twice. I haven't played him. I don't really have an interest to play Richard III, ironically. I don't really have an interest in playing Macbeth either. I've produced and directed the show 4 times. I'm going my 5th time now. But I don't really have a desire to play that character. Richard II is on my list. And I could still possibly pull off Richard II if I get it done soon.
Yeah. You know the scene though I'm talking about, the wooing between
I do indeed. And one of the arguments there is, well, how does this guy know court French so well?
Exactly. The scene, it's like it's a tour de force of it's sensitive, it's but he's also got sort of courtly bravado. He's wooing it with humour and also with a sense of realpolitik in the background, like all the earls and the people of France and England have just convened a big power summit. So by trying to woo France, he's doing a number of things, and the speech is, has all that nuance. The bad quarto is reduced to this: "Tush, Kate, but tell me in plain terms, canst thou love the King of England? I cannot do as these other countries do, that spend half their time in wooing. Tush, wench, I am none such. But wilt thou go over to England?" I mean, it's not quite the same.
You know what it is?
The same league.
It's a bastardization of 2 plays. What has happened there is they have taken Petruchio, who is wooing Kate, Catherine Minola, and they have conflated the 2. That sounds much more like the way Petruchio talks to Kate in Taming of the Shrew than it does Henry V talking to Catherine of France. And what someone has done there with that bad quarto is stolen the lines from one play and put them in the mouth of another character, so to speak, in this sort of bastardized conflation of the 2. That's what's happening right there.
It's patchwork again, and again what Green is accusing the newcomer upstart Crow of is stealing the feathers of, he's saying also that it doesn't matter what play you steal from, it doesn't even make sense sometimes. You just chuck in a whole paragraph of Marlowe or Spencer, and it's just to make it sound more elevated, more poetic, because you're incapable of writing that sort of language. But you wanting it to come across as,
the sad thing, Dean, is you have artistic directors, producers, and directors today who are doing this same thing in the name of trying to make Shakespeare more accessible. I saw a production of Henry VIII at Shakespeare's Globe of London when I was in England last year, and I left at intermission. It was so horrible. Not only because of the concept they chose, but they basically did what Stratford Will, if you're correct, they did what Stratford Will did to the real Shakespeare, because they filled Henry VIII full of quotes and famous lines from other plays of Shakespeare in order to make it interesting to the audience through their really horrible conceptualized hedonistic version of the play. It was terrible. It was one of the worst Shakespeare productions I've ever seen in my entire life, which is why I looked at my watch at intermission and said, life is too short to sit through bad Shakespeare. And I walked out.
It's probably called postmodern or something like that, by taking things from everywhere else. It sounds bad. It sounds bad.
It was terrible. But I love where you're going, because if you throw this, and I'd be curious to see how your Oxfraud adversaries would respond if you threw at them and said, you're right, Green is talking about your guy. And it's just proof that your guy isn't our guy.
I think there are some problems with them admitting that that is their guy, because later on he's accused of usury. He's left Green on his deathbed. Obviously, Green had some sort of loan or some sort of financial transaction with him. He could have been selling Stratford Will plays, or because he was a play broker for the company, he would buy up, other people's writing and adapt it for the stage, and once again, get a cut of all the way along the line. I think the argument would quickly fall to bits if I kept going with this apocryphal Shakespeare idea. I think that would terrify them.
Well, and, the question then begs, of all the other contemporary writers, and some of them extremely famous, including Ben Jonson, first poet laureate of England, how many apocryphal plays do we have of Jonson or Marlowe or Ford?
Very, very few, if any.
Was it because
they don't seem to...
was it because they published everything they wrote under their name and they were all perfect? Was it because no one could plagiarize their work and get away with it because they weren't pseudonyms, they were real men? That is an interesting anomaly, isn't it? That of all the writers of that age, only one has this list of plays, some of them actually published under that name, that scholars, even the highest level Stratfordian scholars, say, well, this wasn't really his work. This was somebody just trying to capitalize on his fame and fortune. And printers and publishers who just chose a play and stuck his name on it to try to sell copies. Well, why weren't they doing that with anyone else?
Yeah.
Was it because they couldn't get away with it with anyone else?
Well, that's my theory. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very interesting approach that like I say, I don't know that that's ever been a topic that we've really dove into on the program before. And I thank you for sharing how you came about this idea and this theory and bringing it to light for us. And as you said, I perhaps too harshly condemned the idea of jumping into the fray with the Oxfrauds, because as you pointed out, sometimes it does provide insight into better ways to combat the Stratfordian myth, or open your mind to a different concept on how to approach the topic. So I thank you for that, because that's a very interesting approach that you have now sort of opened the door to.
Yeah, well, I think it could be done in other areas too. My real concern is that the debate can't really progress if we're in such entrenched positions. They don't listen to us. We keep knocking at the door. They keep saying, go away. There's other areas where there could be room to move, and one of them would be recently they opened to the idea of Shakespeare as a collaborator with other writers. I think there's room for us to open the door there and put forward some of our candidates, whether they be Oxford or someone else. So things are moving, but there's still a huge gulf between the two camps. And just as a thought experiment, I sort of went out into no man's land there for a bit, and I came away thinking, hey, there's a third way of looking at this now.
Yeah. I fully believe that Edward did keep and paid for a group of writers in his circle. And I think that there is some great evidence that Lily, Monday, and others were involved in that circle. And Marlowe may have even been one who was in that circle prior to his death/disappearance. And I think that we can look at modern Hollywood and see that that's how the greatest of television shows are now produced, is with groups of writers who sit around together, and there's a head writer, a chief writer, and they spitball ideas and they throw out, drafts, and the top guy, the editor-in-chief, says, okay, great, I'm going to take all of this and put it together and make a coherent script out of it. I think that there's some strength to that argument. I think that once the Stratfordians open that door, it makes it very difficult for them to explain how Stratford Will would have had access to Anthony Monday and John Lilly and others in that circle, and how he would have been included in any way in that circle.
Who were secretaries of Oxford.
Exactly.
As well.
Exactly. That really makes things difficult for them, doesn't it? Because we can prove that Edward de Vere had relationships with these men, but there is absolutely zero evidence that Stratford Will even was in the presence of any of these men at any time in his life.
I think that's one of the strongest arguments of our cause is the family connections or the personal connections throughout. You look, his uncle Golding translated Ovid. His daughter was to marry Southampton. Lord Burleigh was a close family member. His other daughter married one of the dedicatees of the 1623 First Folio. Everywhere he is, there is someone connected and very important to the story. And as you say, for the other guy, to me, it's like we're two different gold claims, and like the Stratford claim is dug everything up it can do, and there's no more gold in there. They're not going to find any new nuggets. Whereas in the Oxford claim, we barely have to put our spade into the dirt and we strike gold. There's always new information and discoveries coming. It's an exciting time to be an Oxfordian, because things are moving ahead. I think Elizabeth Winkler's book has been quite a door opener.
Yes, and though Elizabeth is not an Oxfordian, she is a journalist, and she approached the subject from that journalistic point of view and that investigative mindset. And I think that that's what her book so successfully does, is approach it from an objective standpoint, which is why so many Oxfrauds, which is why you saw, circling back to how the whole episode began, is, what led you to want to dive in there was watching these people attack her. And for why? For asking the question, not because she comes out and says, here's what I believe, not because she comes out and pushes one agenda or another, but because she had the audacity to even ask the question in such a way that is obviously threatening to them. because she asks the question from an objective, intelligent, journalistic point of view.
Yeah, no, it's a very good book in that regard. It doesn't have a barrier to push, but it's firmly got Stratfordianism in its crosshairs. Yes. Hey, if I could only end with one thing, I've got one thing I think really sums up my point of view, and I think Ben Jonson, is really spelling it out here, who he's talking about, and this is, I think, just evidence of where my train of thought is heading, and it's the poem called On Poet Ape.
Yes.
I reckon this is so explicit. I'll read it. Poor poet ape, that would be thought our chief, whose works are even the frippery of wit. So a poet ape is someone who apes a poet, who pretends but is a phony. And frippery is a cast-off of rags or like second-hand clothing. So he's getting at that idea. He's a dealer of second-hand goods. Our poor poet ape from brokerage has grown so bold a thief as we the robbed leave rage and pity it. So we the robbed are the writers who have been plagiarized. At first they were justifiably angry, now they just shake their heads in disbelief, like, wow, the gall of this guy. At first he made low shifts, would pick and glean by the revisions of old plays. So, Johnson's being pretty specific here. He's saying how the whole sordid operation began. He would, first of all, cut a bit out of this play, pick and glean. Finally, he would get his hands somehow on old plays, which could have been De Vere's courtly plays, and starts to work directly on them. Poor poet ape, now grown to a little wealth and credit on the scene, takes up all, makes each man's wit his own. And told of this, he slights it. Tut! Such crimes the sluggish, gaping autocrat devours. Wealth and success have made the upstart crow pretty confident, and he starts to claim other plays as entirely his own work. These crimes the audience gape at and swallow whole, which is, he says, it doesn't matter if it was theirs, it's mine now, and the audience seems to like it, so that's good enough for me. He marks not whose it was first, but after times may judge it be his own, as well as ours. Fool, as if half eyes will not know the fleece from locks of wool, or shreds from the whole piece. That's where it ends. But I even think that last line, fool, as if half eyes will not know the fleece from locks of wool, or shreds from the whole piece, maybe a crack at Stratford Will being the family being in the wool merchant trade. I also wonder about the word fleece, whether Jonson is intending a kind of a pun there, like to fleece someone means to swindle, to cheat or defraud them. And he says, as if half eyes will not know the fleece, like narrowed eyes, suspicious eyes. If you look at it, will you not know that this is a con,
But
and
it also can refer to two other things. One, the golden fleece, which when worn made you invisible, right? Of Greek legend, right? Or also the wolf in sheep's clothing is wearing a fleece, which is where we get the idea that to be fleeced is to be deceived.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because he's pretty uniformly described as a bit of a wolf, a bit of a lone shark, pretty unsympathetic sort of guy, hoarding grain, and the famous Will, the second best beard in the Will, bit of a penny pincher, I think. So a wolf in sheep's clothing also fits for me.
Well, it's all connected to Greek mythology.
Yeah, it was Jason, wasn't it? Jason and
That's
the
correct.
Golden
Yep.
Fleece.
Jason and the Argonauts. Yep.
Yeah. So the question is, how could Ben Jonson be referring to Shakespeare as the poet ape here, but also in the first folio as the star of poets? I mean, that's where I'm getting to my theory that there's two Shakespeares and two bodies of work. One is erudite, aristocratic. All the writers knew Jonson was in on it. Lots of people who, when they first spotted Venus and Adonis, made hints, we know who this is. And there's the second body of work, which we've been through, is the Bad Quartos and the Apocrypha, and it's just sort of a sitcom kind of version of, lots of laughs, lots of action, lots of fun, and they don't last more than an hour and a half. And, everyone's satisfied with that. So knowing that Jonson knows that there's two different Shakespeares, I think that makes him the perfect man to write the 1623 preface to the folio, because he's playing with our imagination of who he's talking about at one time. He seems to enjoy the ambivalence of walking and teasing that line out with us of, am I talking about the bard, the real writer, or am I talking about the lousy actor who we all regarded as a fool?
Well, and if you're correct, if your theory is correct, then what you end up with in a timeline of events is you have these men who are watching what's happening, and there's nothing they can do about it because they know the truth. They know who the true writer is behind the pseudonym William Shakespeare, and they're watching this guy from Stratford, this opportunist, take advantage, knowing that there's nothing that's going to happen to him. He can't get caught. He can't be in trouble for it. And then at some point along the way, the light bulb goes off and Jonson says, all right, you want to be William Shakespeare? Well, guess what? You're going to be William Shakespeare because I need a front. I need a cover story in order to get out these magnificent plays, these works that have never been published before, because I'm not able to identify the true writer who created them. And I'm going to now become the new opportunist and take advantage of the old opportunist.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's been hard to figure out whether this pseudonym was a posthumous thing that Ben Jonson was heavily involved with the Herbert brothers, or whether it was, as I think now, an opportunistic grab by the theatre owner and would-be playwright, or it was by Oxford himself, like meeting Stratford Will in a dark alley and handing him a play. I don't think that works anymore because the plays he's handing over are not good copy, not even suitable for the public stage. So I think one of the keys to the whole question is Ben Jonson, and how much is he playing with the truth?
Well, and the bad quartos, the bad quartos in the apocryphal plays, also one of the major things there is they don't represent what the true purpose of the iambic pentameter is in the good folio versions. And one of the things that I teach actors is the pentameter is part of the stage direction. The pentameter is like this great composer who is telling you, the musician, how to play the piece of music. And when he varies from it, like, you read that horrible Q1 version of Hamlet's soliloquy, and it is to be or not to be. It definitely is not. But one of the key things about to be or not to be that anyone who studies their pentameter knows is that first line, to be or not to be, that is the question, is an 11-beat line. You could even make it a 12-beat line if you wanted to pronounce the word question as a 3-syllable word. Why? Why would he do that? Well, he does that on purpose because he's saying to the audience, yeah, that didn't sound right, did it? There's an extra beat there. Pay attention.
Yeah.
Because something's out of kilter. And what's out of kilter is our title character contemplating death. And so you hear this 11 beat, and it depends on the actor and the director working together, whether or not it's question or question. I always prefer the 11 beats question. Nonetheless, it's not 10 beats. And the audience goes, wait a minute, that didn't sound right. Yeah, pay attention to what's following next.
Well, it's like in a piece of jazz where you do suddenly a 5/4 bar and like you go, oh, that got my attention. I was grooving along that beat and that next bar had an extra, okay, ears up again. Yeah.
Indeed. So yeah, it's a wonderful contrast there that you have pointed out and that we have come upon that I hope everybody listening will now dive into more fully and come up with their answers. Because as you know, from being a longtime listener and member of the Quiller Nation, that's what we're all about. Everyone has their own journey into this mystery. Everyone is going to dive down their own deep rabbit holes. I still don't recommend engaging too deeply into conflict with Oxfrauds, but to each their own, and perhaps it could lead you into a new area of exploration, just as it has led our wonderful guest for this episode, Mr. Dean Bradley, all the way from the Antipodes of New Zealand. Thank you so much, Dean.
Good. Hope my accent wasn't too hard to understand.
No, I think from what I have gleaned from listeners in the past is that we love accents, and they make the program even more interesting to listen to.
Very good. Thanks so much for letting me be on the show. It's been a privilege.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before we wrap up this episode, fellow Quillers, I need to tell you that there are aspects of our big event in April that are starting to sell out. There are plenty of tickets to the symposium on Friday, April 12th. William Shakespeare, Esquire, was the bard, the greatest legal mind of all time. The Maguire stage at the Guthrie is a magnificent venue with plenty of seats, so that's not an issue. But our block of rooms at the historic Depot Hotel down the street from the Guthrie, that block of rooms is starting to fill up, and there aren't very many left. So if you're planning on coming to Minneapolis and you want that great room rate that we've been able to secure, you need to get off the fence and make your reservations now. Also, we only have 11 seats remaining for the Brittle Glory Shakespeare Marathon on Saturday, April 13th. Some of the performances, if you go to the Guthrie website, you'd find that some of the performances there, some of the sections, the best seats are already sold out for that day. Henry V is particularly popular, of course. But you can still get great seats that we've secured for all three shows if you go to our website and book now. But we only have 11 of those remaining. And it's a great opportunity, a very rare opportunity. And I don't know when or how or where you might find a similar opportunity, because I know that the Guthrie had to secure special agreement with the Actors Equity Association, the union for stage actors, in order to make this happen. And you're going to see the same cast of 25 actors perform Richard II, both parts of Henry IV, and Henry V, all in the same day. So included in our package will also be information about where we will meet between the performances to have a bite to eat while discussing each of the plays we will see. And then, of course, a marathon medal to commemorate your experience. But remember, there are only 11 of those remaining. So if you're joining us in April at the event and you want to be there all day with us on Saturday the 13th, enjoying a full day of Shakespeare history plays and discussion about the plays and the camaraderie, of being with your fellow Shakespeare files, you need to get those tickets now. Now, you can find all the details and links to purchase those tickets at monumentalshakespeare.com. monumentalshakespeare.com. I'd like to shout out to those of you who took the time to reach out with a word or two of concern about my recent bout with the plague. As you may be able to tell, I'm still not quite 100%, but it is getting better by the day. This pesky cough, it's a real monster. So everyone, please take care of your lungs out there, because I understand it's going around throughout the country. It is not a COVID thing. It's just a viral infection, lung infection, cough thing that you just have to work through. Here in Southern Oregon, our medical providers are calling it the 100-year cough, which is definitely not helpful. But I've been on it. I've been at it. My lungs are so tired. My chest, my muscles around my ribs, my back, so tired of coughing. No other symptoms, just this pesky cough that won't go away. So please take care of yourselves, take care of your lungs during this, cold, damp winter months, and make sure you don't get this thing, because it's nasty. Remember, you can always reach me by emailing contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. And those of you who did, I again thank you for reaching out with concerns about my health. So contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. I always love to hear from you, especially those of you like our guest for this episode, Dean Bradley, who contact me and suggest great episodes like this one. And thank you again, Dean, for joining us all the way from the other side of the world in New Zealand. And now it is that special time to hand the microphone over to our very own producer, Jake, for the spin of the Wheel of Destiny to reveal our February Quiller of the Month.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Though I don't know that we have the trademark to Wheel of Destiny, I do appreciate it. If you're not sure what this is, Quillers, well, it is our monthly giveaway in which we name the official Quiller of the Month out of all of the eligible patrons over at patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger. That's patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger. That is the best place to go if you want to support this program. Become an official Quiller of a variety of different tiers, and those eligible are put into this monthly contest. Each and every month, we draw a random name out of those, and the winner gets an item they're choosing from the shop over at dragonwagonshop.com, as well as the clout of being immortalized as the Quiller of the Month for that month. So without further ado, I will spin the wheel here, and the Quiller of the Month for February 2024 is John Creider. John Creider. Congrats, John. Keep an eye out on your email to learn how you can claim your winnings. I think that, looking at my stats here, John was the first ever Quiller of the Month way back in May of 2022. So John Creider reclaiming the title that he brought to the masses, the first ever Quiller of the Month and the most recent Quiller of the Month. Thanks to you, John. Thanks to each and every one of you for your continued support of this program. We hope that you will continue to do your part to ensure that we can provide you with the best possible show we can. Thanks again to everybody, and back to you, Stephen, and your cough.
Thank you, Jake. And as always, congratulations to every monthly winner over the years. Some of you who have won more than once and held the title a couple of times. We hope you are all wearing your Quiller swag with great pride. And just one more thing before we wrap it up. I must admit, the fabric of my bard being is still damaged by that horrible quarto version of Hamlet's soliloquy. Thank you, Dean, for clearly pointing out how such words could have never come from the pen of our glorious writer and had to have been some sort of a hack job in Quarto 1. But please, folks, indulge me if you will, for I must wipe that slate clean. So here, if I can get through it without any coughing, here is the real version we have all come to know and love. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the poor man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would these fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn away, and lose the name of action. Strive on, fellow quillers. Strive on. And until next time, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.